I never thought my own flesh and blood could rip my heart to shreds. In a frigid Bar Harbor lawyer's office, Daniel's fist smashed the table, his voice a venomous roar. "Sign over the $3 million now, Mom, or you're finished." Karen's cold, mocking grin seared through me as I clung to George's lighthouse keychain, drowning in a pain so deep it felt like my soul was breaking apart. I never thought my life, built brick by brick with George, could unravel so fast. In our cozy Bar Harbor home, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic, every corner held a memory. George, my husband of 45 years, was a fisherman who turned a single lobster boat into a small empire, saving every penny until we had $3 million tucked away for our golden years. His calloused hands, weathered from hauling traps, always held mine gently at night. We'd sit on our porch, the lighthouse keychain he carved for me swinging in the sea breeze, dreaming of quiet days. But when George's heart gave out last spring, those dreams shattered. Now, I sat alone, clutching that keychain, staring at the ocean that took so much of him. At the lawyer's office, my son Daniel's voice still echoed in my ears, his demand to sign over the estate like a knife in my chest. "You can't handle this, Mom," he'd sneered, his hazel eyes once so like George's cold and hard. Karen, his wife, just nodded, her lips curled in a way that made my skin crawl. They weren't the family I raised. I'd taught Daniel to fish, to respect the sea, to value our Maine roots. How had he become this stranger, hungry for money we'd scraped together over decades? Our home, with its creaky oak floors and George's old nautical charts, was all I had left. I walked through the living room, past the faded photo of George and me at the Bar Harbor Whale Festival, my fingers tracing the frame. Daniel and Karen thought I was too old, too frail, at 70 to manage the estate. They didn't see the woman who balanced George's books or rebuilt our roof after the '98 storm. But their words gnawed at me, planting doubts. Was I too weak? As I sank into George's old armchair, the weight of their betrayal pressed harder. Little did I know, they were already planning to move in, ready to strip away everything George and I had built. The salt air of Bar Harbor used to feel like freedom, but now it clung to me like damp fog, heavy and suffocating. After Daniel's outburst at the lawyer's office, I thought he might soften, maybe even apologize, but I was wrong. Just 1 week later, he and Karen pulled up to my seaside home in a rented U-Haul, their faces smug with purpose. "We're moving in, Mom," Daniel said, his voice flat, like he was announcing the weather. "Just to help you manage things," Karen, clutching a clipboard, added with a saccharine smile. "You don't need this stress at your age." I stood on the porch, George's lighthouse keychain digging into my palm, my heart sinking like a stone in the Atlantic. Their takeover was swift, like a storm rolling in off the coast. Karen wasted no time claiming my kitchen, rearranging my chipped ceramic mugs gifts from George's fishing trips to make room for her sleek espresso machine. "These old things clutter the place," she said, tossing them into a cardboard box labeled, "Donate." I opened my mouth to protest, but the words died in my throat, choked by a fear I couldn't name. Daniel, meanwhile, took over George's old study, his boots scuffing the oak floor where George used to sketch his nautical charts. "This'll be my office," he declared, unplugging my old rotary phone and replacing it with a gleaming laptop. I watched, frozen, as they erased pieces of my life, piece by piece, like waves wearing down a cliff. By the second week, Karen had my bank statements spread across the dining table, her pen slashing through pages with ruthless efficiency. "You've got no head for numbers, Margaret," she said, not looking up. "We'll handle the accounts from now on." I stood in the doorway, clutching a mug of cold tea, my hands trembling. "Those are my savings," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the hum of her laptop. Daniel glanced up from his phone, his hazel eyes narrowing. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Mom. You're not up for this anymore." His words hit like a slap, and I felt myself shrink, my 70 years suddenly feeling like a century. They didn't stop at the finances. Karen redecorated my living room, replacing George's faded lobster trap coffee table with a glass monstrosity that gleamed under the chandelier. "This is more modern," she said, her voice dripping with false cheer as she shoved my favorite rocking chair into the attic. I followed her up the creaky stairs, my knees aching with every step, and watched as she dumped the chair next to a pile of George's old fishing nets. "You don't need this old junk," she said, brushing her hands clean. I wanted to scream, to tell her that chair was where I rocked Daniel to sleep as a baby, but my tongue felt like lead. Instead, I nodded, my eyes stinging with unshed tears. Every night, I'd lie awake in my bedroom, now relegated to the smallest guest room at the end of the hall. The walls seemed to close in, the sound of Karen's laughter and Daniel's heavy footsteps echoing through the house like a taunt. I'd clutch George's lighthouse keychain, its edges worn smooth from years of love, and whisper his name into the dark. "What do I do, George?" I asked, but the silence was deafening. One morning, I found Karen sorting through my mail on the kitchen counter, tossing bills aside like they were hers to control. "Oh, Margaret, don't worry," she said, her smile sharp as a knife. "We're taking care of everything." I glanced at the stack, my name printed on every envelope, and felt a surge of anger, quickly swallowed by despair. Daniel started avoiding my eyes, his once warm gaze now cold and distant. "You should rest, Mom," he'd say, steering me toward the couch like I was an invalid. One afternoon I caught him rifling through George's old toolbox in the garage, pulling out the brass compass we'd bought for our 25th anniversary. "This could fetch a few bucks," he muttered, not noticing me in the doorway. My heart twisted, a sharp pain that stole my breath. That compass wasn't just metal, it was George's pride, a symbol of our shared journey. I wanted to snatch it back, to scream at him to stop, but my feet stayed rooted, my voice silent. Their control tightened like a noose. Karen canceled my credit cards, claiming it was for my safety, and handed me a prepaid debit card with a $50 limit. "For groceries," she said, her tone patronizing, as if I were a child. Daniel started parking his SUV in my driveway, blocking my old Buick, as if I had nowhere to go. The neighbors noticed, their pitying glances at the market cutting deeper than Daniel's words. "Heard your son's taking over," old Mrs. Thompson whispered at the post office, her eyes soft with concern. I forced a smile, my cheeks burning, and hurried away, the weight of their judgment pressing on my chest. By the end of the month, my home no longer felt like mine. The walls, once warm with George's laughter, now echoed with Karen's orders and Daniel's indifference. I wandered the house like a ghost, my fingers tracing the edges of George's keychain, the only piece of him they hadn't touched. I felt myself fading, my identity slipping away with every change they made. But deep inside, a flicker of defiance stirred, buried under the weight of their manipulation. I didn't know it yet, but that flicker was about to catch fire, sparked by a loss so cruel it would push me to my breaking point. The Bar Harbor air felt colder now, as if the sea itself had turned against me. Daniel and Karen's grip on my life tightened with every passing day, their voices filling my home like a relentless tide. I thought I'd felt pain when George died, but nothing prepared me for the gut-wrenching betrayal that came next. One gray morning, as I sipped coffee alone on my porch, a pickup truck rumbled down the driveway. A stranger in a faded cap climbed out, hooking a trailer to George's prized fishing boat, the Maggie May. My heart stopped. That boat wasn't just wood and fiberglass, it was George's soul. The vessel we christened on our 30th anniversary, where we'd spent countless summers hauling lobster traps and laughing under the Maine stars. I stumbled down the steps, my slippers catching on the gravel. "What are you doing?" I called, my voice cracking like dry driftwood. The man barely glanced up. "Your son sold it, said it's too much upkeep for you." My knees buckled, and I grabbed the porch railing, the lighthouse keychain in my pocket digging into my thigh. "Sold it?" I whispered, the words tasting like ash. I turned toward the house, where Daniel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face unreadable. "Daniel, you didn't—" I started, but he cut me off. "It's done, Mom. You don't need that old thing rotting in the yard. I got $5,000 for it, better than nothing." His tone was casual, like he'd sold a broken chair. Not my husband's legacy. Karen appeared behind him, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. "It's for your own good, Margaret," she said, her voice syrupy but sharp. "You can't keep clinging to the past." I wanted to scream, to claw the smugness from her face, but my body betrayed me. My chest heaved, my breath shallow, as tears burned my eyes. I turned away, unable to look at them, and staggered toward the dock where the Maggie May had sat for years. It was gone now, the water lapping at an empty space, mocking my loss. I sank onto the weathered boards, my fingers clutching the keychain so tightly I felt it cut my skin. "George," I whispered. "How did it come to this?" The pain deepened that afternoon at the Bar Harbor Market. I'd gone to buy groceries, hoping the routine would steady me, but the whispers followed. "Poor Margaret," Mrs. Callahan murmured to her friend at the fish counter, her voice low but piercing. "Her son sold George's boat without even asking her." Another voice chimed in. "He's taken over everything. Shameful." I clutched my basket, my face burning, and hurried past, my eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. The pity in their gazes was worse than Daniel's cruelty. It made me feel small, invisible, like a ghost haunting my own life. I wanted to shout that I wasn't broken, that I was still here, but the words wouldn't come. That night, I sat alone on the dock under a sky heavy with clouds, the sea stretching out like a void. The lighthouse keychain lay heavy in my hand, its carved edges a faint echo of George's touch. I thought of the nights we'd spent on the Maggie May, his laughter mingling with the waves, his hand guiding mine on the wheel. Now it was gone, sold for pocket change by the son I'd raised to love the sea. "I've lost you, George," I sobbed, my voice swallowed by the wind. "And I've lost Daniel too." The pain was a living thing, clawing at my chest, deeper than anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just the boat. It was the final shred of my life with George, stolen without a thought. I stayed there until the cold seeped into my bones, my tears mixing with the salt spray. The house loomed behind me, no longer a home but a prison where Daniel and Karen reigned. I felt like I was disappearing, my identity dissolving with every piece of George they took. My hands shook as I gripped the keychain, its weight the only thing anchoring me. I was 70, alone and humiliated. My neighbor's pity ringing in my ears. My son's betrayal carved into my heart. I didn't know how to fight back, or if I even could. But as I stared into the dark water, a faint whisper stirred inside me, too quiet to name but too stubborn to ignore. Somewhere, buried under the pain, a spark waited, a spark that would soon find its way to George's words, hidden in a journal that could change everything. The Bar Harbor night pressed against me, heavy with the weight of my losses. After Daniel sold the Maggie May, my heart felt like an anchor dragged across the ocean floor, too heavy to lift. I sat on the dock for hours, the lighthouse keychain cutting into my palm, its sharp edges a cruel reminder of what I'd let slip away. My home, my memories, my son all stolen by Daniel and Karen's greed. I was 70, alone, and fading into the shadows of my own life. But in that darkness, something stirred, a faint, stubborn pulse I hadn't felt in years. It started with a creak in the attic, where I'd retreated to escape Karen's relentless redecorating. I climbed the narrow stairs, my knees protesting with every step, and found myself staring at George's old sea chest, tucked under a dusty tarp. I hadn't touched it since his funeral, too afraid of the memories it held. But that night, with the wind howling outside, I knelt before it, my fingers trembling as I pried open the rusted lock. Inside, beneath a pile of faded logbooks, was George's journal, its leather cover worn soft from years at sea. My breath caught as I opened it, and a single page slipped out, marked in George's steady hand. "For Maggie, when the storms come. You're stronger than the fiercest gales," he'd written. This house, our wealth, our love, it's yours to protect. Don't let anyone take it. I pressed the journal to my chest, tears streaming down my face, not just from grief but from a fire kindling inside me. George's words were a lifeline, pulling me from the abyss. I read on, page after page of his love, his dreams for our future, his belief in me. Maggie, you held our family together through every squall. You can do it again. My sobs echoed in the attic, but they were different now. Raw, yes, but laced with a spark of defiance. For the first time in months, I felt him, not as a ghost, but as a voice urging me to fight. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, George's journal hidden under a shawl, my hands still shaking from the weight of his words. I needed help, someone who'd known me before I became this hollow shell. I thought of Ruth, my oldest friend, a retired librarian who'd shared coffee with George and me at the Bar Harbor Pier every summer. My fingers fumbled as I dialed her number on my old flip phone, hidden from Karen's prying eyes. "Ruth," I whispered when she answered, my voice barely steady. "It's Margaret. I don't know who I am anymore." There was a pause, then Ruth's warm voice, like a lighthouse beam cutting through fog. "Oh, Maggie, what's happened?" I choked out the story: Daniel's threats, Karen's takeover, the sale of the Maggie May. My words tumbled over each other, jagged and desperate. "They're erasing me, Ruth. I don't know how to stop them." She didn't hesitate. "You're not alone, Maggie. I know someone who can help, Laura, a lawyer who's fought cases like this. She's tough but kind, and she'll know what to do. I'm calling her now." I hung up, my heart pounding, a mix of fear and hope swirling in my chest. That afternoon, I slipped into the guest room, my new prison, and started searching for proof of my life. Behind a loose baseboard, I found a small metal box where George kept our important papers. Bank statements, the deed to our house, insurance policies. My hands shook as I gathered them, each page a piece of the life we'd built, now threatened by my own son. I hid the box under my bed, my pulse racing as I heard Karen's heels clicking downstairs. "Margaret, where are you?" she called, her voice sharp with suspicion. I froze, clutching George's journal, its words burning in my mind. I wasn't ready to face them yet, but something had shifted. George's voice, Ruth's support. The papers I'd reclaimed, they were kindling for a fire I didn't know I had. I stood in the dim room, my reflection faint in the window, and whispered to myself, "You're not gone yet." It felt fragile, like a wave barely breaking the shore, but it was there. As Karen's footsteps faded, I knew Laura was coming, and with her, a chance to fight back. I just had to hold on a little longer, to let that spark grow into something unstoppable. The Bar Harbor dawn broke gray and heavy, mirroring the storm still raging in my heart. George's journal, with its words of strength, had lit a spark in me, but it was fragile, flickering against the weight of Daniel and Karen's control. I sat in the guest room, my new cage, clutching the metal box of documents I'd hidden under the bed. Each paper: bank statements, the deed to our seaside home, insurance policies, was a piece of the life George and I had built, now at risk of being swept away. Ruth's promise of help, in the form of Laura, a lawyer, kept me anchored, but fear still gnawed at my bones. Could I really fight my own son? I was 70, my hands trembling, my voice unsteady, but George's words echoed, "You're stronger than the fiercest gales." Laura arrived that afternoon, slipping into my home like a quiet tide. She was a small woman, maybe 50, with sharp blue eyes and a voice as steady as the Maine cliffs. I met her in the backyard, away from Karen's prying ears, the lighthouse keychain tucked in my pocket for courage. "Margaret," Laura said, setting a leather folder on the picnic table, "Ruth told me everything. You don't have to let them take your life." Her words hit like a gust of wind, stirring the embers inside me. "But they've already taken so much," I whispered, my eyes darting toward the house where Karen was rearranging my curtains. Laura leaned forward, her gaze unwavering. Not everything. You've got options, legal ones. We can revoke any power they think they have and protect your estate with a trust. I stared at the folder, its pages filled with dense legal terms that swam before my eyes. I don't know if I can do this, I admitted, my voice barely above a breath. Daniel's my son. I raised him. Laura's hand covered mine, warm and firm. You're not betraying him, Margaret. You're protecting what you and George built. He's the one who's forgotten that. Her words sank deep, stirring memories of the woman I used to be the one who haggled with fish suppliers, who rebuilt our porch after a nor'easter tore it apart. I nodded, my throat tight, and whispered, "Okay. Tell me what to do." Laura outlined the plan with calm precision. Revoke any power of attorney Daniel might claim. Transfer the house and assets into a protective trust, and gather evidence of their manipulation. We'll need to move quietly, she said, glancing toward the house. They can't know until we're ready. I felt a chill, not from the sea breeze but from the weight of what lay ahead. That night, I slipped into the attic, my flashlight casting shadows across George's sea chest. I pulled out more documents, tax records, investment statements, each one a thread tying me to our past. My hands shook as I hid them in the metal box, my heart pounding with every creak of the floorboards. To build my courage, I started practicing in the guest room mirror, staring into my own tired eyes. "This is my home," I whispered, my voice cracking at first, like a boat scraping against rocks. I pictured Daniel's cold stare, Karen's smug smile, and tried again, louder. "This is my home." The words felt foreign, but each repetition made them stronger, like a muscle waking up after years of sleep. I thought of George, his sun-weathered face beaming as we danced at the Bar Harbor Whale Festival, his voice promising I could weather any storm. I wasn't that woman yet, but I was getting closer. One evening, as Karen clattered dishes in the kitchen, I overheard her on the phone, her voice sharp. "Once we get the paperwork signed, we'll sell the house. Margaret won't fight, she's too weak." My blood boiled, and I gripped the lighthouse keychain so hard my knuckles whitened. Weak? I'd survived losing George, raising Daniel alone through lean years, keeping our home through storms and debt. I wasn't weak. I was just quiet. Too quiet for too long. I slipped back to my room, my resolve hardening like the granite cliffs outside. Laura returned the next day, bringing more forms and a quiet confidence that felt contagious. We sat in the shed, surrounded by George's old fishing gear, as she explained the trust in detail. "This will lock your assets down," she said, tapping a document. "No one can touch them without your say." "So?" I nodded, my fingers tracing the keychain's edges, feeling George's strength in its grooves. "What if Daniel fights back?" I asked, my voice trembling. Laura's eyes softened but didn't waver. "He might. But you're not alone anymore, Margaret. I've got your back." As Laura left, I stood in the shed, the smell of salt and rope grounding me. I wasn't ready to face Daniel yet, but I was preparing, piece by piece. George's journal, Laura's plan, Ruth's support, they were my lifelines, pulling me toward a fight I never thought I'd wage. I tucked the documents deeper under my bed, my heart racing as I heard Daniel's SUV pull into the driveway. The confrontation was coming, and I could feel it, like a storm gathering on the horizon. I just had to hold on, to let my newfound strength carry me into the battle ahead. The Bar Harbor air crackled with tension, like the calm before a nor'easter. I stood in the guest room, my heart pounding like a drum against my ribs, George's lighthouse keychain gripped tightly in my fist. Laura's plan was in motion. The documents to revoke Daniel's power and secure my estate in a trust were ready, hidden in the metal box under my bed. For weeks, I'd practiced my words in the mirror, building the courage to face my son. But now, as the moment loomed, my knees trembled. I was 70, a widow fighting to reclaim her life, and the weight of it felt like carrying the Atlantic itself. But George's journal, its pages worn from my constant reading, burned in my mind. You're stronger than the fiercest gales." I wasn't backing down. It started with a crash. I was in the kitchen, stirring tea, when Daniel stormed in, his face flushed red, clutching a crumpled bank statement he'd found in my old desk. "What the hell is this, Mom?" he bellowed, waving the paper like a weapon. "You've been hiding things from us." My stomach lurched, but I forced myself to stand straight, my hands steadying on the counter. Karen appeared behind him, her eyes narrowing like a hawk spotting prey. "Margaret, this isn't like you," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "You're confused. Let us help." I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sand, and met Daniel's gaze. His hazel eyes, once so like George's, were cold, predatory. "No," I said, my voice low but clear, cutting through the room like a foghorn. Daniel froze, his jaw tightening. "What did you say?" he snapped, stepping closer, his 6-foot frame towering over me. I felt the old urge to shrink, to apologize, to smooth things over. But I thought of George, of the Maggie May sold without my consent, of my home turned into a stranger's domain. "I said no," I repeated, louder, my voice shaking but holding firm. "This is my house, my life. You don't get to take it." The words felt like a wave breaking free, crashing against the silence. Karen laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, Margaret, you're not thinking straight. You're too old for this stress." Her words stung, but I held my ground, my fingers tightening around the keychain. Before I could respond, Laura stepped through the back door, her blue eyes blazing with calm authority. She held a folder, its edges crisp and official. "Daniel Karen," she said, her voice steady as granite. "I'm Laura, Margaret's lawyer. This is a restraining order, effective immediately. You're to leave this property today." She handed Daniel the papers, her gaze unwavering. Daniel's face twisted, a mix of shock and fury. "This is a joke," he roared, tossing the folder onto the counter. "Mom, you can't do this. You're not in your right mind." His words echoed Karen's earlier taunts, but they no longer had power over me. I stepped forward, my heart racing but my resolve unbroken. "I'm clearer than I've been in years," I said, my voice steady now, like the lighthouse beam cutting through a storm. "You betrayed me, Daniel. You sold your father's boat, tried to steal our home. Leave, now." Karen's smirk faltered, her eyes darting to Daniel as if expecting him to fix this. He lunged toward me, his hand outstretched, but Laura stepped between us, unflinching. "Don't make this worse," she warned, her tone sharp. Daniel stopped, his chest heaving, his hands balling into fists. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy he'd been the one who'd clung to me during thunderstorms, who'd laughed on the Maggie May. But that boy was gone, replaced by a man consumed by greed. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice cracking with desperation. I held his gaze, my eyes burning with tears but refusing to look away. "No, Daniel. You will." The room fell silent, the air thick with the weight of my words. Daniel grabbed the folder, his hands trembling, and stormed toward the door, Karen trailing behind with a scowl. As the front door slammed, the house shuddered, but I felt a strange calm settle over me. I'd faced my son and stood my ground, something I hadn't thought possible just weeks ago. Laura touched my arm, her voice soft. "You did it, Margaret." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak, the keychain warm in my hand. But I knew this wasn't the end. Daniel's anger wouldn't fade quietly, and Karen's scheming ran deeper than I'd imagined. As I stood in my kitchen, the papers secure, I braced for the storm still to come, a public reckoning at the town festival, where my fight would no longer be confined to these walls. The Bar Harbor Whale Festival buzzed with life, its colorful banners snapping in the late summer breeze, the scent of fried clams and lobster rolls mingling with the salt air. I stood at the edge of the crowd, my heart pounding like waves against the shore, George's lighthouse keychain a steady weight in my pocket. The restraining order Laura had served Daniel and Karen had forced them out of my home, but I knew their anger wouldn't fade quietly. At 70, I'd faced my son in private, but tonight, under the festival's twinkling lights, I'd face him in front of our town, a reckoning I hadn't planned but couldn't avoid. George's journal, its words of strength etched in my mind, gave me courage, but my knees still trembled as I clutched Laura's legal folder, ready for whatever came next. The festival was in full swing, with fiddles playing and children darting through the crowd, when Daniel's voice cut through the noise like a foghorn. "She's stealing my inheritance," he shouted, standing on a picnic table near the bandstand, his face red with fury. The crowd turned, murmurs rippling like a tide. Karen stood beside him, her arms crossed, her eyes glinting with cold calculation. "Margaret's lost her mind," Daniel continued, pointing at me as I stood frozen near a lobster trap display. "She's throwing away Dad's money, our family's money." My chest tightened, the familiar sting of humiliation creeping in. But I felt Laura's hand on my elbow, her voice a quiet anchor. "You've got this, Margaret." I took a shaky breath, my fingers brushing the keychain, and stepped toward the bandstand. The crowd parted, their eyes heavy with curiosity and pity. I'd spent months shrinking under those gazes, but tonight, something was different. George's words, "Protect our legacy," burned in my chest, and I wasn't the frail widow Daniel thought he could control. I climbed onto the stage, my legs unsteady but my resolve like the granite cliffs of Acadia. "Daniel," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying over the stunned crowd. "You don't get to rewrite our story." The festival fell silent, the music fading as all eyes turned to me. I held up George's journal, its leather cover gleaming under the stage lights. "This is your father's voice," I said, my voice trembling with emotion but not breaking. "He wanted our $3 million to build a future, not to tear our family apart. You sold his boat, the Maggie May, without my consent. You took my home, my dignity, and tried to erase me." My words hung in the air, sharp and true. Daniel's face paled, his mouth opening, but no sound came out. Karen stepped forward, her voice cutting. "You're delusional, Margaret. You're too old to handle this." The crowd gasped, and I felt their support shift toward me, like a tide turning. "Too old?" I said, my voice rising, fueled by years of swallowed pain. "I'm the woman who built this life with George, who kept this family afloat through storms you'll never understand. You don't get to decide my worth." I opened the journal, reading aloud George's words. "Maggie, you're stronger than the fiercest gales. Protect what we built." Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. The crowd murmured, some clapping, others nodding, their faces warm with recognition. Old Mr. Jenkins, who'd fished with George, shouted, "You tell him, Maggie." Daniel staggered back, his hazel eyes wide with shock, as if seeing me for the first time. Karen's smirk vanished, her hands clenching into fists. "This is ridiculous," she spat, grabbing Daniel's arm. "Let's go." She stormed off toward their SUV, parked 50 yards away, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. Daniel hesitated, his shoulders slumping, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking, but I shook my head. "You made your choice," I said softly, my heart aching for the boy he'd been but firm against the man he'd become. He turned and shuffled after Karen, the crowd watching in silence as they disappeared into the night. I stood on the stage, the journal pressed to my chest, the keychain warm in my pocket. The crowd erupted in applause, their support wrapping around me like a warm blanket. Laura stepped up, her blue eyes shining with pride. "You did it, Margaret," she whispered. I nodded, tears blurring the festival lights, feeling stronger than I had in years. But this wasn't the end. With my home and legacy secured, I had one final step to honor George's dream and find peace in the life I'd reclaimed. The Bar Harbor sunrise painted the sky in soft pinks and golds, casting a warm glow over my seaside home. For the first time in months, the house felt like mine again, not a prison, but a sanctuary of memories. I stood in the living room, running my fingers over the oak frame of the photo from the Whale Festival, George's smile frozen in time. At 70, I'd faced my son Daniel's betrayal, stood tall against Karen's schemes, and reclaimed my life under the festival lights. The restraining order had sent them away, and Laura's legal work ensured my $3 million estate was safe in a trust, untouchable without my consent. But the true victory wasn't the money, it was finding myself again. I walked through the house, now repainted in vibrant blues and whites, the colors of the Maine coast George loved. Laura had helped me set up the George Harper Community Fund, dedicating a portion of our wealth to scholarships for local kids and restoration of the town's rose garden by the library, a dream George had scribbled in his journal. "Let's give back, Maggie," he'd written, and now I was. At the garden's reopening, I saw young faces light up, their futures brighter because of George's legacy. It felt like he was there, his hand on my shoulder, whispering, "You did it." Daniel was gone, holed up in a motel 10 miles out of town, alone after Karen filed for divorce and left for the city. I felt no joy in his downfall, only a quiet ache for the boy who once ran to me with seashells. But I couldn't carry his choices anymore. I'd chosen myself, my home, my strength. Standing in the garden, the lighthouse keychain in my pocket, I realized life's storms don't define you, your courage to face them does. No matter your age, you have the power to stand up, to protect what matters, to rebuild. If my story touched you, please share it. Like this video, leave a comment about your own journey, and subscribe to the Unwanted Revenge to hear more stories of resilience. Let's lift each other up, one spark at a time.